Hello everybody and welcome to Bodmin Keep, Cornwall Army Museum's hosted webinar, Brown Babies, A Living History, with guest speakers Dr. Lucy Bland, Professor of Social and Cultural History at Anglia Ruskin University in Cambridge, Dr. Chamion Caballero, Director and Co-founder of the Mix Museum, and Arlene Nilsson and Dave Greene, two children born to black GIs and white women in Britain during the Second World War. My name is Charlotte Marchant, a freelance researcher working with Bodmin Keep in partnership with the Imperial War Museum as part of their Second World War and Holocaust Partnership Programme, to explore diverse aspects of life in Cornwall during the Second World War and to connect these stories to what's happening in people's lives today. Since November 2022, on behalf of Bodmin Keep, I've been tasked with uncovering new information and lesser-known stories about the experience of Black American GIs in Cornwall during the Second World War and the extent to which Black servicemen were segregated while stationed in Britain. So of the 3 million American GIs who passed through the UK en route to Europe, around 10% of these were African American. The US government continued the practice of racial segregation during the war. The majority of Black GIs were conscripted to non-combatant support units. The title of this webinar, Brown Babies, comes from the historic name given to British mixed-race babies born to Black GIs and white women in Britain at this time by the African-American press. The physical Brown Babies exhibition, curated by Dr. Lucy Bland, is currently on display at Bodmin Keep and gives voice to some of the 2,000 mixed-race children born from these relationships and explains what happened afterwards. But before I hand over to our first speaker, Dr. Lucy Bland, I'd just like to make you all aware of a few functional practicalities. So you'll notice that all your cameras and microphones are currently disabled. So should you have any questions at all during the webinar, you're encouraged to use the Q&A function, which you should find at the top of your screen. You'll need to type your questions in here, and then we'll have some time at the end to go through these. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome our first speaker, Dr. Lucy Bland, Professor of Social and Cultural History at Anglia Ruskin University.
Thank you very much, Charlotte, and thank you so much for inviting me to this event. And I'm really looking forward to hearing any questions or points that you make. Okay, well, the story of the Windrush generation and how they were treated both on their arrival and recently by the government has appalled the British public. Andrew Levy's wonderful book, Small Island, and the highly acclaimed TV, film and play of the book has added significantly to our knowledge of 1940s British racism. Yet, if most Britons know something of the racism in which African and Caribbeans are subjected in the late 40s and 50s and beyond, they're far less likely to know of another sorry tale of institutional racism that I've researched, that of the approximately 2,000 children born during World War II to Black GIs and white British women. Now, these children grew up in predominantly white localities, South and Southwest England, Cornwall included, of course, East Anglia, South Wales, the Midlands, the sites where the GIs had been predominantly based. Many suffered racism. Under half just under half, I think, were put in children's homes, but very few were adopted because adoption societies claimed they were too hard to place. Now, I interviewed over 50 of these children, now in their late 70s, and their stories have informed my book, Britain's Brown Babies. Can we have the next slide? I've talked to many more since, and just to explain again this term, British Brown Babies, that Charlotte mentioned, the awful term used at the time in Britain was half-castes, and the African-American press, they invented, I think, this term, brown babies, to refer to these children born in Britain and then later in the countries of occupation after the war, Germany, Austria, etc. Now, I first heard of these children in October 2011 on watching the second episode of a 3-part BBC series called Mixed Britannia, which is a history of mixed race people in Britain in the 20th century. And you can still get hold of this. I think most of it's on YouTube. Unbeknown to me, this was largely based on research of Chamion Caballero, who you're going to hear from very soon, and I actually didn't know her at the time. Now, 2 such children appear in the programme. And I'll say more about them in a moment, but I was immediately taken with their stories, but I was working on something else at the time. So 2 years later, I went back to the subject and discovered that very little had been written about them. And, you know, while there are accounts of British experience of the First World War, extensive accounts, they very rarely feature these war babies. Another reason I was drawn to the study of these children is more personal, that interracial relationships and mixed raceness are there in my own family, which is a kind of enriching diversity that's possibly typical of many 21st century families. So I managed to find and then interview Tony and Brian from the BBC programme. So you've got Tony on the left, and he was in a Dr. Bernardo's home, and I love this picture. It's him on his trike, going past Princess Margaret and paying her not the slightest attention. Why should he? And then Brian, who is on the no, wait a moment. These are both of Tony, aren't they? I'm sorry, no, that is Brian. I can't read the script because of something has come. I don't know if you've got this. I've got something above my. Oh, okay. Yes, Brian. That's the only picture Brian has of himself as a child is the one on the right. Now, Brian put me in touch with 3 other men who he'd been with in the same Liverpool children's homes, and through the online organisation GI Trace, which helps people find their GI fathers and relatives, and also appearing on national and local radio, I interviewed many more people, and contacts began to snowball. And I discovered that many of my interviews' parents had met in dance halls or in pubs. These were the 2 key social spaces where Black GIs and local women were able to socialise, generally on evenings designated Blacks only. So Charlotte mentioned that they brought their segregation laws with them, and that was indeed the case in relation to pubs and dances. So you would have dances with just Black GIs and local women one night, and then white GIs the following night. And many pubs became Blacks only for the duration of the war. Some were mixed, but many were segregated. And indeed, certain villages and towns near the bases were deemed Black or white for the duration of war or on certain days. Now, people frequently mentioned, to quote, the extremely pleasing manners of the coloured troops. However, many Britons were less keen on the Black GIs having relationships with local women. And when babies of these relationships began to appear, the disapproval was often extreme. Now, presumably babies born to white GIs would on occasion have been passed off as the offspring of husbands if the dates roughly fitted. This initially was the case with Babs. Next slide, thank you. And she was born in Ipswich in October 44. Her mother was married, her husband, and to quote, was in the Navy, and when he came back from sea, he honestly believed I was his child. I think because my complexion at the time was very fair. It took 6 months for my complexion to change. She was then packed off to Dr. Bernardo's home in Long Melford. Now, the children born to Black GIs and British women in the war were nearly all illegitimate. If any American serviceman wanted to marry, he had to get permission from his commanding officer, who in Britain were nearly all white. And if you didn't get permission, you were court-martialed. But for a Black GI wanting to marry a white British woman, permission was invariably refused. So they were born illegitimate. The stigma of illegitimacy was very big then, in a way that's very hard, I think, for us to understand. And the mothers of the children born to Black GIs were often treated very badly. A number of them have mentioned to me the kind of hostility that their mothers faced. Monica, next slide, please. She often got called names in the street. To quote, there was a lady from a couple of doors away. Her and Mum never got on. I remember one day, Mum and me were sat on the gate where we lived, and this lady came past and hit my mum and shouted, "You N lover." And a few of those stories I've heard, which is really appalling. So these children were growing up, as I said, in very white areas. They often suffered racism, acute sense of difference, and a lack of racial belonging. They also lacked fathers, for even where they'd been kept by the mothers and grandmothers, they were often told little or nothing about their fathers, sometimes not even a name. Now, Dave Greene was unusual in that he was always told about his mother, about his father by his mother. So I want to hand over now to Dave Greene, and then after that to Arlene Nelson, both of whom I interviewed for my book, and they're going to tell you their own stories. Thank you very much.
Good morning. I hope you can see and hear me. My name is Dave Greene, and I had the good fortune to be kept by my mum back in the day, which was quite unusual for a lot of children in my position. Mum was a very strong young lady, and she met my father, as Lucy sort of hinted, it was at a dance, and was obviously taken with him very strongly. And as a result, I was born in 1945, and against the advice of one particular sister of my mum's, but she decided she was going to keep me no matter what. And she always told me about my father and the experiences they had with regard to his treatment by particularly white Yanks, as she said, the white Yank soldiers. They were really scathing, to say the very least. But they were both strong, and my father was accepted in the family home, spent a lot of time with them. However, as time went on and he was sent back to the States, he wrote to my mum, he sent money orders, and mum used to have to take me up to the post office, guide my hand to sign for me to have the money, or for her to have the money to keep me. But all the letters that were sent by him to my mum didn't actually get through to her. I found this out in later life because my grandmother, lovely as she was, didn't fancy the idea of her daughter swanning off to the States and marrying a black guy. So I stayed with my mum in my grand's home for quite some time until my mum met a young Scotsman who was in Yeovil working in Westland, in the factory there. Met my mum, who was obviously walking me about. Didn't know initially that I was her child, but when he did find out, it didn't put him off. I think, in fact, he probably thought that she was the more strong a woman for having kept me. And they got married. And as I always say, he married my mum and myself. That was in 1950. And he was a brilliant dad to me. Always helped me to be strong and be proud of myself. Taught me to, as opposed to some other guys who were of mixed race, who dealt with the insults that they went through by using their fists. He taught me to use words against them, to be proud of myself and not resort to the physical retaliation. And that helped me through my life a great deal. What else can I tell you? He was a brilliant man. And in the fullness of time, when I actually contacted my father, which was quite late in my life, I was nearing 50. But as I said, my mum always, when I was young, showed me photographs of my father. So I knew who I was. My birth certificate was sent to the States at the request of my father, who signed my birth certificate and swore an affidavit acknowledging me as his son. But having said that, it didn't stop me suffering somewhat at that. Words more so than physical insult or physical attacks by fellow children and in later life other adults. In my early years, I went to a junior school, and I was see the school photographs. I was the only person who wasn't white. And in secondary school, I went to a grammar school, and again, I was the only one who was not white. But I had some good friends when I first went there who stood by my side figuratively and almost literally when some of the guys were giving me insults about my lack of whiteness. But the area that I grew up in, I had good, strong friends. Most of the other guys of mixed race and girls of mixed race went to, this doesn't, I don't mean this to be disparaging, went to secondary modern school, so we didn't mix together. So in that way, I guess I felt alone. However, as I said, my stepfather was brilliant with me. And when I did find the location of my father, which came about somewhat unusually, I had a friend who was in the Mormon church, and he had contacts with various people, particularly in the States. And on one occasion, he gave me a short list of names of GIs, well, not necessarily GIs, of Americans with the same name as my father's, and with some telephone numbers. And I tried phoning those and had some success. On one occasion, this was in February of 1999, I got into a conversation with a man called, well, David Otto Greene, which is quite strange in a way because my mother always thought that my father's middle name was Otis. So I phoned this guy and said I was looking for David Otis Greene. But he told me, no, that's not me. My name's David Otto Greene. And that was that as far as I was concerned. So I ended the telephone call, and that was that. But a couple of months later, having been in contact with a lady called Shirley McGlade, she sent me a whole lot of information about this GI, black GI called David Otto Greene, who it turned out was my father. I phoned this person in June and the telephone was answered, and I explained to him that I was looking for a person called David Otis Greene. He said, "Oh, the news is on." He said, "The news is on. Don't you watch the news?" I explained I was calling from England and I was looking for this person. He said, "No, I'm David Otto Greene." And I just asked him, "Were you in England during the Second World War? Were you in Somerset?" And he said, "Do you mean Yeovil, Somerset?" I said, "Yes." And he said, "Do you know Joan Bagwell?" And I said, "Yes, I do. She's my mum. She's my mother. And you're my father." He said, "David Augustus." That was the start of a conversation that went on for two and a half hours. It was amazing because it was like we were just picking up a conversation that we had been carrying out for how long, I don't know. And the story is that I then went over to the States, met him. I think you can see the photograph of me with him. And we kept in touch. And I met my two brothers. I have two sisters over there as well. I didn't meet those at the time, but I met my two brothers. Half brothers, you'd have to say, I suppose, but no, they're my brothers. And we've kept in touch. My father sadly has passed. I don't know how much more time I've got, but my life was made positive because of my stepdad, and who enabled me to be strong, be proud of the genes I got from my father, and there we go. My life has been full and it's had its ups and downs. I have suffered racism in various ways. I was a police officer for some time, and when I joined the police force, I can remember the message going ahead of me before I went to my first posting that this Zulu was going to be joining the ranks of the local force. And there we are. I don't know how much more you want to hear from me, but my life has been positive. I'm proud of my mixed race and of the way I was brought up to be proud of it. I think that's all I can say, really.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dave. That was great. I'm sure everybody else kind of really appreciated to hear a personal story as well as how that's affected you in your life. So thank you very much for sharing. It moved me very much, actually. I was kind of in tears at one point there, so thank you.
I'm sorry, I do waffle. I have no script. I am.
It was great, Dave. Thank you. So now I'd like to invite Arlene to speak. So Arlene, are you there? I think your mic's off, Arlene. You just might need to, oh, there you are.
No, I'm on now. Hello there. I'm Arlene Nelson. I was born in a very small village in Lancashire called Marchant. My mother was already married. She had two children, and their father was away at the war. My grandmother, she was told that I was going to be mixed race. So she spoke to my granddad, who said, right, okay, she's going to be kept within the family. And he actually got my mother a cottage and paid the rent for all the time that we lived there to make absolutely sure that she could afford to keep me and keep me within the family. I'm just looking here. I hope you can all hear me because all I can see is a picture of me as a baby. I'll carry on speaking in the hopes that you can. So I grew up in this little village in Mottram. I can honestly say that I had really a happy childhood. I think I was fortunate in the fact that it was a small village. Everybody in the village knew me, knew the family, and it was quite a close-knit group of people. I used to run errands for the old ladies, and they used to buy me a cake, which was just lovely. I went to a primary school in the next village, and again, I had very little bother. So I think I was really quite fortunate. And then I passed my 11 plus, I went to grammar school, and it was an all girls school. So again, I think I was really quite fortunate. Wherever I went, I was always the only mixed race person. And I just kind of got used to it. In fact, I didn't really realize that I was any different until I was maybe about 4 or 5. And I said to my mother, why am I different from the rest of them? And she said, well, your dad was a GI. And I said, right, okay. Now I hadn't a clue what a GI was at that time. So I just said, okay, what was his name? And she said, he said his name was, his father was Louis Armstrong. Now, even at that young age, I knew that Louis Armstrong was really quite a famous person. So I dismissed that and thought, well, that can't be true. And I never, ever asked, and I never looked for any information until I was much, much older. And I always meant to say to my mum, can you tell me any more? But unfortunately, she died at a very young age. She was just in her early 60s. And it was something that I just never got round to doing. So I was very fortunate in the fact that I wasn't really picked on, I wasn't bullied until I went into nursing. And it was a shame because the people who actually made my life really very, very difficult were the Black people that worked at the hospital. They discovered that I was mixed race and they just weren't happy at all. And most of them ignored me. Some of them, one girl in particular, an African girl, she made my life absolute hell to the point that I was almost leaving nursing before I'd even started. But we managed to get over that, and I did go on to be a nurse. And I carried on working until I was 71 as a nurse. It was an excellent career for me. Very occasionally at times, some of the patients used to say, where are you from? And if I said that my father was a GI, I would get things like, oh yeah, one of the things that the Americans left behind. And I didn't really like that very much. So at one point I said that my father was West Indian. I thought, well, that sounds good. And then they said to me, which island did he come from? Now, I didn't know there was more than one island. So that snookered me as well. So I didn't bother saying anything after that. So I just sort of used to say, my father's American, I don't know anything about him. Now, one of my granddaughters, I've got 8 grandchildren, and the oldest granddaughter, she always used to say to me, Grandma, when are we going to find your American family? And I never thought that it was possible because I didn't have a name and I didn't have any information about him at all. And then through Lucy and that wonderful book that she wrote, I met Sally, who does the GI tracing. And she has, in fact, managed to trace. She found my father, who he was, but unfortunately he died when he was really very young. And then she found that I had a half brother. Now, we have had some correspondence, but they're almost a shy family, quite a small family that seem to keep to themselves. And I have been in touch, but it's kind of dropped off just now. So I'm hoping to be able to regenerate it. I don't think he is very interested in correspondence. It was always his wife that did the writing. And it was almost as though me and her were pen pals, but I wasn't finding any information out about my father. So what I've done recently is I've got a paperback copy of the Brown Babies book that came out recently. and I've sent that off to them with a letter. So I'm hoping that once they read that and they see that I'm not really out to get anything from them, I just want to know a little bit about my background. And hopefully then I'll hear again from them. I'm not going to say any more just now. I'm hoping that you've managed to hear me because I can't see me at all. So I'll now hand over to Chamion Caballero, who's from the Mixed Media Museum.
Thank you so much, Arlene, and thank you to Bodmin Keep for inviting me today to be part of this wonderful event. So just briefly, for those of you who aren't familiar with the Mixed Museum, we are a digital museum contributing to broadening knowledge of Britain's multiracial past by preserving and sharing the history of racial mixing in Britain. And one of the ways we do this is through our special exhibitions on a specific aspect of Britain's mixed race history, such as the Brown Babies exhibition, curated from Lucy's research, which we launched in September 2020. And so Lucy had initially developed a travelling exhibition made up of 7 6-foot paper banners that was intended to tour widely across museums and galleries across Britain. And this can currently be seen at Bodmin Keep. If you have time to go and see it, we do recommend it. It's a wonderful exhibition. But early in 2020, the exhibition became stuck in Manchester Central Library due to the onset of lockdown. So in response, Lucy turned to the Mixed Museum to discuss possibilities for developing a digital exhibition. And as a solely online museum, we were well placed to work with her to develop this work at short notice. And so the key objective of the exhibition was to keep the feel of the original banner displays while presenting the material online in an accessible and engaging format. And so while we kept the original sections of the banner with all their content, our digital platform allowed us to incorporate a wealth of material not originally included. So we added not only more text, but also additional photographs and personal narratives, as well as these wonderful audio snippets of the interviews that Lucy conducted with her participants. And we made some videos specifically from the oral interviews. But perhaps the most exciting part of creating the digital exhibition was the ability to add to it. And both the online material and the exhibition's webinar launch event in September 2020, which featured a number of the Brown Babies participants, including Arlene and Dave, these provoked a wave of engaged and moving public reactions. And so we incorporated, firstly, many of the survey responses into the exhibition by turning the feedback into this attractive World War II styled postcard display. But as we also began to receive emails from members of the public whose own personal stories directly resonated with the history in some way, we began to incorporate these. So some people told us about their friendships with Brown Babies who they went to school with in their neighbourhood, while others had slightly different backgrounds, but similar mixed wartime family histories. So perhaps father was a Caribbean soldier. But most of the people who got in touch were themselves part of a Brown Babies American family, often the children or grandchildren of Black GIs and white British women who were themselves tracing their family history and seeking connection with relatives. So we added a responses section to the exhibition, featuring a range of content from those with a personal connection. And these responses have been submitted in whatever form people prefer. So we have photos, videos. We've also asked people if they'd like to send us poems, artwork. And as a result, we have created a new and ongoing community archive of memories. And as we continue to receive more interest, we will keep adding and keep expanding on the digital exhibition. So very shortly, over the next few months, we're looking to add a section on the organisation GI Trace, who Arlene mentioned, which has played a critical role in helping families find their relatives. We'll also be adding some videos to our YouTube channel, from a round table of Brown Baby participants who spoke with Lucy and Sally in Bristol. And our Brown Babies YouTube channel, it's really caught people's attention. We've now had over 25,000 views from people all over the world, and these stories are helping to educate a new audience on this formerly overlooked history. And we were also so thrilled when Folk Alliance International reached out to us to ask if we would be interested in hosting folk musician Saskia Tompkins as our artist in residence. And Saskia's mother, Susan, who features in the exhibition, is the daughter of a Black GI who was forbidden to marry Susan's mother and required to return back to the US while Susan was placed in orphanages. And Saskia tells her family story through music in a very powerful and very emotional video that you can view on the Artist in Residence section of our website. So just to finish up, I'd like to say a few words about why the Mixed Museum was particularly pleased to host Lucy's exhibition. One of the things that is really important to us at the Mixed Museum is highlighting the complexity of the history of racial mixing in Britain, trying to make sense of the more complicated space between the perspective that sees racial mixing as inherently problematic and that which sees it as inherently progressive. And one of the ways that we try to bring out this complexity is by centering the voices of mixed race families at the heart of the discussion, as their voices are often the ones that are missing from historical accounts, which were mostly written by outsiders. And I think one of the most striking and moving aspects of the exhibition is the gathering together of diverse aspects of these lives as told by the children themselves, who, older now, many with children and grandchildren of their own, discuss this history not in terms of a static moment in time, but as lives long lived, as navigating journeys that are both individual and personal and still evolving. Informative, illuminating, moving and emotional, the Brown Babes exhibition is one of our star exhibits at the Mixed Museum, and we were thrilled to have our work rewarded by the Museums Association when we won their Museums Change Lives Award in 2021 for Best Digital Engagement, and this builds on Lucy's book itself being recognised by the Social History Society, winning their book prize for the Brown Babies work. So just to end, we hope you will come and visit us, spend some time visiting the site, reading through all the wonderful accounts of the Brown Babies that we house in the exhibition. That might inspire you to go on and read Lucy's book, which is absolutely fantastic. And we're always happy to hear your thoughts and to add more stories to our collection. So please contact us at any time at the address on the site if you'd like to know more. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Chamion. Thank you, Arlene, Lucy and Dave as well. That was really great. So I guess I don't think we've got any questions yet in the Q&A function, but I did have kind of an immediate few questions that came to mind listening to you all speak. My first question is actually to Dave. So Dave, you mentioned that you found your dad around age 50. Did you ever feel like you wanted to reach out before you got to that age, or was it what made you reach out at that particular point?
Yeah, I guess I always wanted to meet him, to know more about him. In my early teens, I'd had correspondence with him, whilst I was still at school, and told him what was happening with me, with my athletic prowess that I used to have, and with my education. And then suddenly all correspondence stopped. I'd written to him and a letter was sent back, not known at that address. So I thought, there we go, perhaps he doesn't want to know after all. So it was always in the back of my mind, yeah. But it took all that time for me to really go for it. And when we did meet, as I said, it was just like, well, we'd always known one another, and I am so very much like him. Fortunately, unfortunately, I don't know. We're very similar, use the same sort of language, spoke the same sort of language, which was brilliant. It just answered a whole lot of questions. And seeing my two brothers in the States, I have 4 children of my own, but one brother in particular was so similar to one of my sons in mannerisms, all sorts of things. Absolutely incredible. So the power of the genes is. Whew.
So on that point, Dave, we've got a question that's come in from Rooney saying, do you still have contact with your American siblings, and how did it feel when you met them?
Yeah, I do. Because I had a call from my brother Andrew in the States yesterday, who called me just to let me know that his mum had passed yesterday morning. But he needed his big brother to know. So yes, we do keep in touch. We are, as he said, we are family, we are brothers, and we have great love for one another.
Sorry to hear that, Dave. But thank you so much for sharing. It really does.
That's fine. That's fine. You know, we are very close, although an ocean apart. We are blood together.
Thank you, Dave. So I've got another question that's come in. Maybe that's better for Lucy or Chamion to answer. That Susan asks, are some of these former babies still searching?
Yeah, shall I answer that? Yeah, I mean, it's extraordinary because people are still looking. So as I said, the children born in the war, obviously in their late 70s now, and many have searched for a long time and not been able to get anywhere. But what's happened in the last few years, really only in the last 5 to 10 years, DNA has got more sophisticated and more people have been signing up to DNA, particularly ancestry DNA. In the States, it seems that the African Americans particularly use ancestry DNA, often as a way to find out where their ancestors came as slaves, which part of Africa. And obviously, you can only find someone if they're on the database. And when I've interviewed people and they say, you know, I didn't even have a name, like Arlene, I don't know how I can possibly ever find my father, I've said, go down the DNA route. But as you can imagine, on the one hand, you know, you've got to have someone in the States who's done the DNA for you to find. But on the other hand, people can be very suspicious. I mean, imagine someone contacting you and saying, look, I'm your long lost half sibling. You might think, what do they want? So it's difficult. And I mean, what's so brilliant about Sally Vincent, who helps with the DNA search, is that she's very good at knowing how to approach people. But yes, the people are still looking, and we still hear from people. And I do always say, look, DNA seems to be the best route to go down, and hopefully you'll get a response, even if it's a sort of a cousin who can then put you in touch. So yes, that's the answer. And I think some people have you know, who really gave up. Now they can, you know, think, okay, I don't know if there's anyone who's watching is in that position, but please let us know and we'll put you in touch with people who can help on that front.
And I just add to that, that as well as people who are searching in Britain, there are people searching in the States. So we were recently contacted by a woman who said that they had discovered that their father had had a child when he was over in Britain, and she wanted to know if we would be able to help possibly identify her brother. So at the moment she's trying to go back through her father's military records to find out where he was based, and then we, you know, it said we would help her put a call out and share information. And I think what's really interesting is as the digital exhibition grows and we start sharing the history, particularly on the YouTube channel, it attracts attention from lots of people who also want to build on the history. And you know, it's gone. I think what Lucy has done has been amazing, because it's gone from being a very hidden history to something that people are increasingly knowing about.
You are mute, Charlotte.
Classic, sorry about that. So I don't know whether you both saw the last chat, but Susan basically said that as an American with years of genealogy experience and a daughter and a child of a white GI and an English nurse, she'd be happy to help in any way if she could. So I know Susan quite well, so I'm able to pass on contact details if that's useful.
That's fantastic, Susan. Thank you. Yeah, that's really good. I mean, I think that would be really helpful for people who who are trying to find people in the States. So yes, thank you. Great.
Can I just ask what the toll is, the toll on actually taking those stories forward as an interviewer and as someone kind of interpreting that material for exhibition online for both of you, really?
What the toll on us emotionally?
Yeah, so because it's quite heavy stuff, really, a lot of it. So it's really emotional, isn't it? So
yeah. No, it is. And recently, Chamion mentioned we had a meeting of about 15 so-called brown babies up in Bristol that was filmed, and I was there, and Sally Vincent, Chamion couldn't come, unfortunately, and Dave and Arlene were there, but everyone went round the table and told their stories, and some people had not spoken publicly at all and told things, and they got very emotional, and we all got very emotional. Dave and Arlene want to respond to this, but I mean, it was incredibly emotional. I mean, people were crying by the end of it, because some of the stories are just incredibly sad, but also can be cathartic. So the sort of responses I had from the people I interviewed, in fact, someone at the book launch, Arlene spoke at my book launch, also someone called Eugene, and he said one of the things he felt from telling the story, his story of his life and upbringing, was a sense of catharsis and empowerment. So although it can be incredibly upsetting, I think telling it for them can be powerful and whatever. And I think for those who are hearing it, it is amazing. And I think I really appreciated for the first time what it means to grow up not knowing about one half of your family. And for those I interviewed who were in children's homes, not knowing about either part of your family, because they were consistently lied to in these children's homes. I mean, a number of the people I interviewed were told, oh, your parents are dead, oh, your mother didn't want you, or, you know, I mean, it was just appalling, actually. And then, you know, those that were kept by mothers and grandmothers, I mean, Dave was very lucky, but most weren't told anything, or were also lied to, said, oh, your father died in the war and things like that. So lost the thread of what I'm saying now. I just, yeah, I think it was, you know, very, for some, it was very important to be able to tell their stories, but often really difficult. And I was, yes, what I was saying, actually, I appreciated for the first time how lucky I and many people I know who our parents and grandparents are, how lucky we are to just have that as a kind of taken for granted thing, and to have this sense of lack, of a big gap in your life, and also that gap that renders you different in terms of ethnicity. That is just quite a big thing. So yeah. Do you want to add to that, Chamion?
I would, but I realise that the time is moving on. Okay. I've seen that there are some questions for Arlene and Dave as well. But I would say, you know, Lucy and I are both coming to Bodmin Keep in a couple of weeks, where we'll be able to really talk about the research and the exhibition in more detail if people are going to attend. But I just think because Arlene and Dave, this is their only chance to talk, I'll step back and wait until then.
Thank you both very much. So there is a question specifically for Arlene here. So Arlene, how does your family feel about the contact you've been making with your American relatives, and are they excited?
I must admit, my sons, for some reason, I don't think that it's that they don't want to know, but they've never really shown a lot of interest. Neither of them have read Lucy's book, although their wives and partners have. All the grandchildren have read the book, but I don't know what it is about the boys. But Lucy met Rachel at the book launch, and she is so excited about it all. She's the one that used to push me and say, why don't you find out? Why don't you find out? And I honestly felt that I couldn't. And because of DNA, we have managed to find a half brother. And it's really strange because he looks very much like my older son. So again, Dave spoke about the genes going through the family, and I think they're definitely there. But the grandchildren are particularly excited about it. I have another one who was going through major problems and nobody knew why. She was anorexic. She dropped out of uni. She was struggling with her mental health. And she actually saw the exhibition of the museum, the banners that went to Bristol. And she phoned me and she said, you know, Grandma, it all makes sense now. And I hadn't realized that because I thought everybody knew about my background, what little I knew, I hadn't really spoken about it. And she's one of the younger grandchildren. And she said, I said, why didn't you ever say anything? She said, well, nobody ever spoke about it and I didn't like to ask. So it's kind of turned her around, and I always had quite a strained relationship with her and didn't know why. And I think this was part and parcel of it. And now me and her get on really, really well, and she chats away, and in herself, she's so much better. So if nothing else, that to me was worth everything. It really was. And talking about the toll that it had on Lucy, I remember the interview that we had, and I think we spent about 2 hours, and I think I cried through most of it. I had no idea how emotional it was going to be, but it was like a therapy session for me, and I felt sorry for Lucy because I cried through most of it, and I had no idea what a relief it was for me to be able to talk about who I was. And Lucy's actually given us all permission to own who we are and to speak openly about it. I mean, I go to the church guilds and everything talking about the Brown Babies book now, and it's been wonderful.
Thank you. It was wonderful talking to you.
So Arlene, just also following off what you were speaking about earlier, and how you asked why am I different to everybody else when you were younger? Do you feel like as you've got older, your identity has become more solidified? Is it just kind of you felt like that way when you were younger, or is it something that's kind of still with you now?
I think because I'm older, I know why I'm different.
Yeah.
Before, I just had no clue. And I think what made it harder, I don't think people realise, and it seems a bit strange for me not to realise that I was totally different from my 4 brothers and sisters, 2 older and 2 younger. But there weren't the same photographs about, and nobody had a phone that everybody was on Facebook and everything. So you saw people all the time. And it was actually a photograph that I had seen of me as a child with some of my friends in the village. And I was obviously different. And that's when it registered that I was different. And it took all that long time for it to register because I just hadn't really seen myself as other people do. I think the thing that used to bother me most when I was growing up was the fact that people only ever saw the black side of me and not the white. And all I ever knew was the white side of me. So it got to be very confusing in the fact that, yes, I had the 2 bits, but I only knew one. But people weren't interested in that white side. It was always the black side because that's what they saw. So I did find it confusing. I'm A-okay with myself now. And certainly since Lucy's book came out, it's given other people permission to ask about it as well. Whereas before everybody skirted around it. And when they described me, they would say I was tall with black hair and glasses and miss out the obvious bit that people would recognize me through. But now people are quite happy to speak quite openly. And Lucy has no idea what she has done for us brown babies. She doesn't. And I go on every time I get the opportunity, I give Lucy thanks for what she's done for us.
Thank you, Arlene. You're making me cry now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, honestly. Thank you to all of you. I mean, it's been a fantastic hour and I hope other people have enjoyed it too. I can't thank you all enough. It's been fantastic. So really appreciate you giving up your time.
It's been a pleasure for me. Mm-hmm.
So I guess just conscious of the time now. So it's now 5 to 12. So I guess that will bring us to a close. So again, I'd just like to thank all of our wonderful guest speakers and all of those who have attended today's webinar. And if you're interested in learning more, so Bodmin Keep, as I mentioned earlier, have the Brown Babies exhibition on site until the end of, well, at some point in April, which I had an extension. And as Lucy and Chamion said, they're going to be in Bodmin Keep for a study day on the Saturday, the 25th of March, and that will run from 10 till 4. So we've got a few other activities planned in for that day, and you can find all the details of that on Bodmin Keep's website. So I guess that does bring us to a close. And thanks again, everybody, for attending, and thanks to our wonderful guest speakers. Really appreciate it. It's nice to read some of the comments that people are leaving.
Yes.
I just quickly say, while there's time, we're really looking forward to meeting some of you when we come down to Bodmin Keep, and obviously we'll have a lot longer there, so yeah. We'll be able to really go into detail about Lucy's research and the histories and what's happening next at the museum and around this body of work generally, because I saw that someone said, are we connecting with museums in America? And yes, we really hope that we will be able to do that at some point and work together to gather as many of these stories as possible, because they're just so emotional and so moving, and I think they really change people's perspectives of that period of time, of wartime Britain, when they know about this. So it's a really special project for us at the Mixed Museum. And quickly myself, I'd just like to say thank you so much to Arlene and Dave and everyone who are sharing their very personal and intimate stories with the world, because it's your stories that really connect with people and that make the difference. So thank you both so much. You're just so wonderful. Thank you.
Absolutely. And of course, the book wouldn't be anything without all your stories. That's what makes it, obviously. So if anyone has not seen the book, it is filled with stories of people like Arlene and Dave. Thank you. It said someone asked the time on the, yes, 10, there you give them the time, 10 to 4. We're not, yes, because I mean, Charlotte will also be talking about her work on Black GIs. It's not just me and.
So Lucy and Chamion will be talking at 2 o'clock, 2 till 4. In the morning, I'll be doing a local history walk from 10 to 11. And then I'll be doing a talk on my own research into Black GIs in Cornwall, specifically where they were stationed from 11:30 till 12:30. But as I say, there's all the information on that day on Bodmin Keep's website. So you can find out more information on their What's On page.